Today is July 24th, 2024. My name is John Raymond Irving. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia, in the Virginia Tech Library. Joining me today for an oral history interview is Mo Johnson. This interview is part of an oral history project for veterans who served in the Vietnam War. Before I get started, Mr. Johnson, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
Excellent. So, Mr. Johnson, I'm going to try and move somewhat chronologically throughout the interview, but just to get started, can I get some basic information from you? What was your highest rank in the military?
I was in the United States Air Force, and the highest rank was captain.
And what was your occupation then?
I was in the Medical Service Corps.
How many years did you serve, and when were they?
About 3.5, almost 4 years, and from 1966 to 1970.
Neat. So I'm going to take a step back and kind of start at the beginning of your life. Where were you born, and where did you grow up?
I was born and grew up in a small town in Kansas, Dorado, Kansas, which is near Wichita. Went to high school there. After high school, attended Kansas State University and was commissioned into the Air Force through the ROTC program and graduated in 1966.
Neat. What was it like growing up in El Dorado, Kansas?
It was really great. It was an oil town, and we had 2 refineries, one on each end of town. And when you come into town, it stinks because of the oil refinery. It puts off that sulfur. And we always used to say, well, that's the smell of money. That's what put us through school and put food on our table.
Yeah. Did you grow up with any siblings?
I had an older brother who was 12 years older.
What were your parents like?
My dad worked at one of the refineries and worked his way up. He went as a substitute electrician, stayed on for like 35 years and ended up being an assistant plant manager. So he just worked his way up through the ranks, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom.
Did either of your parents ever serve in the military?
No, they were born in the early 1900s, 1902 and 1904. So my dad was too young for World War I and too old for World War II. What he did serve is they had block wardens during World War II who would be sure that when it was lights out, they would be sure all the houses had their blinds drawn and be sure they were dark. El Dorado wasn't a prime target, but we did have 2 oil refineries. But they just wanted to be sure all the houses were dark.
Yeah. Was it ever targeted, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, I'm glad to hear it for you. So you said you went to college or you graduated in 1966, is that correct?
Uh-huh.
How did you enjoy your time in college?
It was very good. I was in a fraternity, Sigma Chi, and it probably gave me a little structure and made me study a little more hard than I would if I was living in an apartment without the structured life, and enjoyed it very much.
Nice. What was ROTC like?
I vaguely remember it. It wasn't anything that I remember except we had to wear a uniform 1 or 2 days a week in order to attend the classes that we had in the military science program.
Were you always planning on going to college?
Yeah, my brother he was 12 years older, like I said, and he did attend college, and so I think it was expected of me to go to college. Neither of my parents had any college, but I think we were expected to and look forward to it.
Did your brother also do ROTC?
Yes, he did, and he was in the Army after college for a few years.
Did he serve in Vietnam as well?
No, he was out of the service when Vietnam was happening.
Gotcha. So what led you to choose Air Force ROTC?
I don't know. That's a good question. I really never thought about it. I probably thought Army, you're going to be on the ground and get shot at. So I thought it was a safer career if I was going to go into the military.
Yeah. And again, were you always planning on going into the military, or was that just prompted by circumstances?
No, I thought I would. They also offer some stipends when you're there to help pay for college as you're going through, and my brother did it, and we could have used the money to help me get through school, so it's sort of like a no-brainer.
Did you go into that expecting or preparing to end up going to Vietnam?
Not at all, no. They give you a list of what would you like to do in the Air Force when you graduate and get commissioned. medical service corps was not on my list of anything I wanted to do, so it was just sort of what they needed, and that's where I went and ended up basically making a career of it even after the military.
So you said you graduated in 66, and then did you go to basic training after that?
Yeah, we had an officers program that all the medical service corps officers needed to go to at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas for a few months before you went to your first assignment. So I went there, and then I went to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. They had a dispensary there, and so I was the medical service corps officer, squadron commander, which I was over all the enlisted people at that dispensary, and basically took care of their educational needs and record keeping, things like that.
What was your time like in Texas before I move on to Jersey?
It was hot. It was warm, I remember, and did make some good friends that lasted a few years in the military, and enjoyed learning the medical aspects of being a medical service corps officer. So it was very, very useful.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the friends you made there?
They were also medical service corps officers, and it's like, we didn't get stationed together, but we stayed in touch a little bit after that basic training program.
Yeah. Did you write each other often during your service, or was that more after?
No, it was more during the service than after. Just kept track of each other for a while.
Gotcha. Do you still keep in touch with any of them?
No, I don't.
So then you moved to New Jersey, you said. What was that like?
That was my first assignment. I was not married, so I lived on campus, on base for a while in the BOQ, Bachelor Officers Quarters, and just enjoyed life as a single Air Force officer for a while, then moved off base for a while and lived with a Navy ensign and an Army lieutenant, because Fort Dix, the Army base, is right next door. And the Navy ensign that I lived in a house with was in charge of the whole blood processing lab at McGuire Air Force Base. And what they did is I'm going to get into a little detail about that. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
He was in charge of this whole blood processing lab, and there were 2 or 3 of them around the country that would receive blood that was donated to go to Vietnam. And they would process it, and every day put it on an airplane and ship it to Vietnam. So it goes to Alaska and then to Vietnam. And then it comes back, it stops in Alaska, and he could request once in a while to put king crab legs on it in Alaska. So it would arrive back at McGuire Air Force Base with king crab legs that we would enjoy eating. So that was sort of a fun experience.
That's a nice treat.
But that was sort of my first connection to Vietnam, was sending blood. No, I didn't do it, but my roommate did, sending blood over to Vietnam.
Yeah. Is that, or when was about the first time you started hearing more about Vietnam?
Well, more thinking about it was probably in 66 and 67, because I wasn't real happy in that job. It was not challenging, boring. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just volunteer for Vietnam. That's got to be more exciting than this, pushing papers around the desk. So I volunteered for Vietnam in 67 and got orders to go to be there in February of 68.
And so you said you volunteered to go to Vietnam. You weren't drafted?
Right. No, there's no drafting. And I don't, they can maybe ask you if you wanted to go, but I volunteered to go.
So I know you got there in early 68. When
Right.
was it that you actually volunteered to do that, though?
Probably in late 67.
Okay. So at that point, the Tet Offensive hadn't really started yet, but the violence had increased. Had you heard anything about that?
I really don't remember hearing about it, but when I arrived, the Army roommate that I had at McGuire, he was in Vietnam, and when my plane landed, he met me coming off the plane and handed me an M16 rifle and said, "Let's go." I had no idea where we were going, but he just took care of me while I got checked in and everything. And that was when the Tet Offensive started in February of '68 when I was there.
Yeah. And where were you stationed in Vietnam?
Oh, I'm sorry, at Cam Ranh Bay with the 26th Casualty Staging Flight.
Can you explain to me a little bit how the casualty staging flights work?
Yes, I can. For all of Vietnam, there were 3 casualty staging flights, and they were all under Air Force command. And any military that was fighting on our side, on the Allied side, if they were wounded severely enough that needed to go out of Vietnam to either mend or stay out and go home, they would go through one of those 3 casualty staging flights. The one in Da Nang, one at Cam Ranh Bay, and one in Tan Son Nhut Air Base near Saigon. So I was over one of those 3 casualty staging flights. They would come in during the daytime. We would take them off of planes. We had 3 wards where we could clean their wounds, rebandage them. During the nighttime, we would call headquarters in Hawaii, and we would tell them what was wrong with the patient and what their hometown was. And they would try to assign them to a hospital closest to their hometown that would meet their needs as a patient. And then the next morning, we would take them out to the airplanes, bigger airplanes, big jets, C-141s, and whether they're ambulatory or on litters, and then we'll load them on the bigger planes, and they would fly out that morning. And during the day, we would get more patients, casualties coming in to the base.
And so you were the director of that
I was in
staging
charge
flight?
of the casualty staging flight.
Was that your role immediately upon coming to Vietnam, or did you start
No,
somewhere
I was
else?
a few months. I was second in command, and then the major that was there left, and then I became officer in charge.
So I understand that during that time period, there was a lot of fighting up near Khe Sanh and near the DMZ. Were they typically bringing them down towards you and Cam Ranh, or was that at another casualty
I
staging
don't
flight?
know. It probably depends where they were and how busy the other casualty staging flight was at Da Nang. So I'm not sure about how that all worked and deciding which casualties went to which casualty staging flight. I'm not sure.
Yeah. What was it like to come into such a hectic environment? I mean,
Well, it was sort of scary at first because that's the first time I'd obviously been around wounded people. But it's interesting, after a few weeks, it's just like commonplace. You're going to see patients. You don't know what their wound is going to be, how severely they're going to be wounded, and they're just patients that you take care of, and you sort of forget that this is obviously important, but it didn't have that scariness. That's probably not the right word, but it wasn't anything to be concerned about because you were going to take care of them. We had nurses to take care of them, doctors. So it just got to be a very enjoyable 1 year.
did it live up to your expectations of being
it was.
more exciting?
I tell people it's the most rewarding 1 year of my life.
That's incredible.
Yeah, because I was helping save lives every day.
Was Cam Ranh, where you were stationed, ever under attack or?
It was, but not until later in 1968 that we did receive some mortar fire.
What was it like to have that change from just helping people to also having to be, scared for your life?
When I first arrived, we lived in what were called Hooches, which are like 24 by 48, and there were 3 or 4 officers to a hooch. And then when I first arrived, we did not have sandbags up 5 feet around the whole building. But later on, we did that. So all the hooches were able to withstand a mortar if it came close because it's going to hit the sandbags and not go into the hooch. And obviously, if there was a warning, we would hit the floor in the hooch, and we had sandbags around us that were above our level.
Were the injured veterans, were they not in hooches, but where were they?
Where were they?
When they were being treated?
You mean where did they come from?
No,
Okay.
in Cameron, like on the base, where were they kept, and were they? Did you have to take any precautions to make sure that they were safe from those
Yeah,
mortars and
no.
stuff too?
When we would take them off the plane on buses, whether ambulatory or on litters, we would bring them back to our casualty staging flight, which were 3 big Quonset huts. I think you know what a Quonset hut is, the big metal half-round building. And we would keep them there, clean them up, and they would stay there until the next day. So we would just keep them right there, and then they didn't really leave our wards. They had to stay on our wards.
So was all of the patients were gone within a day?
Yes, most of them were gone within a day.
What was that like to have such a quick turnover?
Well, it's sort of interesting. It's like a ballet. Everybody knows their role and what part to play and when to play it. So it just gets to be just smooth, mechanized way to do it, because everybody had a role and they knew what their role was.
Are there any memories from that year that stick out to you?
There are a couple. We obviously had some very severely wounded military people. Some were napalm bombs, which, if you have a whole lot of skin burn, it puts off a different odor that you just don't forget when you smell it. And they take special care because they can't lay in a bed for too long and they have to be rotated. We had some VIPs come and visit us. We had Jimmy Stewart, who's an actor who you may know or may not know, heard of Jimmy Stewart, and Art Linkletter, who was a TV personality. And they would come through probably the USO program to cheer up the troops and walk through the wards and say hello to people. We also had South Korean patients, Australian patients, anybody that was fighting on our side, we would take care of. We had one fella who somehow, and I don't know how, got a small tiger and put him in a briefcase, a little duffel bag, and was trying to take him back to the United States. So our only role was, I can't say we helped him, but they kept that tiger quiet in that duffel bag until we got him on the plane to go to Japan. So all we know is that he got to Japan with that little baby tiger. I don't know how far, much further he got, but yeah, he did get that far, and that was sort of a highlight that I can remember.
That's pretty
sort
neat.
of sort of humorous that he was wounded, but he wanted to bring this tiger back. It's crazy.
Yeah. Outside of napalm, what were the other more common
Most of it
injuries?
was shrapnel wounds from mortars or gunfire, direct gunfire. And we had all kinds. We had a lot of walking wounded, and a lot were amputees if they stepped on mines. So some were missing arms or legs. So you had a whole variety.
Hmm. Was the amputation or immediate care, was that typically done in the field?
That was done more in the field, like at a MASH hospital, where they would be the first medical team to take care of the patient, and then they would get shipped to us after they were not stabilized, but at least taken care of, wounds cleaned, maybe not closed, but at least cleaned and bandaged, and then sent to us.
How did they typically get sent to you?
There's many ways. Could be on helicopters, all kinds of propeller planes, whether it was a C-130, 123, things like that. The big jets did not bring us patients, but the propeller planes and helicopters would bring us patients.
I understand you found it rewarding, but that is certainly a stressful situation to be in. How did you decompress?
We were fortunate enough at Cameron Bay to be right adjacent to the South China Sea beach line. And we had a beautiful beach that we could go to if we ever had any time off. Our usual work week was 6 days a week, except during TET, it was 7 days a week. We didn't get off. If we had patients, we had to take care of them. So, but the one usually later on, we would have maybe a day or half a day off when we could go to the beach and relax. And we had a great group that lived around our hooch and in our hooch, and we ended up building a patio as a project on the time we had off to have a patio to relax in with a bar and everything else.
That's neat. That sounds like a good time.
Yeah, it was. It was a good time.
Nice. So you said it was 6 days more often in the end. Do you recall when the fighting picked up or kind of died down some?
Yeah, it picked up the day I arrived, or before I arrived, really, because I got there in February for the 68 Tet offensive. And it probably, and then when I look back, and I looked at some records I found online about the patient load, and they were staying pretty consistent for probably 6 to 8 months during 1968, and that was about 3,500 patients a month getting shipped out from all the casualty staging flights.
Were there any relationships you made during that time period that you stuck with?
I'm trying to think. Unfortunately, there weren't very many that I kept in touch with after the service. No.
Regardless of keeping in touch, were there any guys that come to mind from your time there? Just who you got to talk with?
The hooch mates that I had. One was a major who was a dentist, and a couple who worked somewhere else in the base, but they weren't in the corps. And then the corpsmen that I worked with were great. So I worked with these. They were EMTs, not corpsmen, in the Air Force, and they were great to work with. And when the Tet Offensive happened, the major came in and said, that was in charge of the whole hospital wing that I was in, said, "Do you need any more help? Let me know." And I said, "No, just keep everybody out of our way. We know what we're doing, and we'll do our job. I don't want to have to train anybody. I don't have time to train anybody right now." And so we just worked by ourselves.
I know you've talked a little bit about kind of your role, but what was just an average day looking like?
Oh, that's good. Probably started about 6 o'clock with a cold shower. We had no hot water in the shower. So you started with a cold shower, had breakfast, even though I don't remember where. I think that the hospital had a cafeteria, but I'm not sure. And then would arrive, and they would have where everybody was going for a destination. And so we would have to figure out how to load the airplane. And you load the airplane the opposite way you load the bus, because first on, first out, instead of first on, last out. So you have to figure out how to configure how many litters you're going to have to put on the buses. Then you start getting everybody loaded, the litters first, and then the ambulatory can walk on the buses with seats, and then we drive them out to the runway, probably about 8 o'clock, and get there, and the large C-141 would be there, and we would start loading them onto the big jet, and then get them all loaded, and then go back, clean up, and start receiving patients again.
And just to clarify, you said litters. What do you mean by that?
Oh, at the stretcher that you see that like a canvas bottom with poles and to go through, and one person at each end to carry the litter.
Understand, yeah. So during your time, did you receive any awards or medals?
I did receive a Bronze Star since we were under fire and providing services to save lives.
Do you remember the occasion that you got that for?
I got it after I left Vietnam when I went to Thailand. That was my next assignment. And so it was actually awarded to me when I was in Thailand, at the hospital in Thailand.
Gotcha. In either service, did you keep a journal or take photographs or anything like that?
No, I kept a lot of slides, which I'm going to work with Jason on getting digitized, hopefully. But I did not keep a journal. I just took a lot of pictures.
How did you keep in touch with the outside world and your friends and family?
It was by what we call now snail mail. It was all postal mail
Mm-hmm.
back home.
How
came
often
in.
was that?
Probably maybe once a week.
Gotcha.
I would try to tell people how everything was okay.
Yeah. Who were you frequently writing to?
My parents primarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand you don't want to worry them and
Right.
let them know what it was
Right.
like. So, were you ever wounded during your service?
No, I was not wounded.
Did you ever experience disability later, though?
I did. Funny that you ask. Agent Orange was a defoliant that was used all over Vietnam in the 60s and maybe early 70s. And everybody sort of knew about it, but I didn't think anything about it. Well, 50 years later, I came down with prostate cancer and didn't think anything of it. I didn't like having a prostate cancer, but I had it. And I volunteered at the local hospital with a veteran who was in the Navy about the time of Vietnam. And he said, you should look into getting benefits for that. You were in Vietnam and they used Agent Orange. He said, you ought to call him and ask the VA. So I said, okay. So I called him and I told him what years I was in Vietnam and what my diagnosis was. Mine was prostate cancer, but there's about 10 diseases that if you had later in life and you were in Vietnam during a certain time period, you were eligible for disability benefits. And with prostate cancer, I was awarded 100% disability during my time with treatment and recovery, and I'm still under 100% disability because I was in Vietnam and because they used Agent Orange. The government assumes or presumes that that's the reason that I got prostate cancer when I was 78 years old. So who's going to argue with that?
Certainly wouldn't argue against it if I were you.
I wish I wouldn't have got cancer, but it's nice that the government gives me that benefit.
I wonder if I might jump in with a question. Were you aware of the ongoing fight for veterans benefits and how the Vietnam Veterans of America led that fight to lobby Congress to recognize it finally?
Yeah, no, I really wasn't. I'm sorry to say.
But you benefited.
I did benefit from it very much.
It was a streamlined process, it seems.
Yes, it was very easy to do. But obviously you have to prove that you were there, and they can verify that. And during that time period, so it was an easy process. I'm sorry. Good question. Cam Ranh Bay, I was very fortunate that we did have female nurses. It was one of the few locations in Vietnam where the Air Force had female nurses. The Army's had nurses there for quite some time, and some even in the field. But we did have female nurses at Cam Ranh Bay Hospital and the Casualty Staging Flight. But it was primarily the base was for jet fighters. It was a jet fighter wing because that's what was used to fight the Viet Cong and everybody else. The bombers came from Thailand, which I went to a year later, or the Philippines. So the bombers were from outside Vietnam, and the fighters were based in Vietnam.
And I will get to your time in Thailand here shortly, but real quick beforehand, what was it like, or did you interact with the civilian population at all?
We did. Only we had some Vietnamese women that would clean our hooches, which was nice, but our medical unit, we would go out into the countryside and offer medical assistance to the local Vietnamese people. And those that lived in the mountains were called montagnards. They lived in huts, grass huts, dirt floors, wore minimal clothing. These people were living very primitively. So we would go out and what's called MedCap, medical assistance to civilians program, and try to screen them for medical conditions, do some treatments if we could to those people. We would do that probably once a month and go out into the countryside to help them. Excuse me.
Yeah, no problem. I'll give you a second. What was it like to interact with the Vietnamese population, and what were their attitudes towards you all?
Well, most of them were making money or employed by the base to do cleaning, so they were very friendly toward us because we were giving them jobs, basically. And I didn't get off base to the towns that were around there. I thought it was too dangerous. Most people didn't go off base unless they were escorted, because you never knew. That's the funny thing about Vietnam. You don't know who the enemy was. They didn't wear uniforms like they did in World War II. So anybody could be a Viet Cong or a sympathizer of the Viet Cong. You just didn't know.
Did you hear any stories of people going out into the towns and being approached by people who were Viet Cong sympathizers or something?
Yeah, no, not really. I didn't.
So you're rendering medical services for these people. What was the frequent things you had to provide for them?
Well, obviously, we would take vitals, and if they had a complaint, because they knew we were having sort of a clinic, so they would come, whether it was a toothache, sore, upset stomach, whatever it was. Some things you could maybe help diagnose and help treat. Others you really couldn't unless you could get them to a medical facility that was not really readily available nearby.
Was there anyone who you knew who comes to mind when you think about certain acts of heroism and courage?
That what? I'm sorry?
Comes to mind when you think of acts of heroism and courage?
It's sort of unrelated. My hooch mate, who was the dentist, had to go home for a funeral. And on his plane on the way back, strayed over Russia and was forced down in Russia. And since he was the ranking officer on that plane, he's a dentist. They're not military. They just happen to be in the military. But he was the ranking officer. So they took him off the plane and they interrogated him and everything. But he was kept in Russia for 2 or 3 days, and then they released everybody on the plane and they came back. Now, he wasn't a hero. He just happened to be in a bad situation at a bad time and got taken down in Russia. I guess the corpsmen and the doctors and the nurses that just treated all those patients were the heroes that I looked up to. So that we had great doctors. We had an ICU right next to us, and excellently trained physicians. So those were probably the heroes. Those people that took care of the wounded.
How much of your skills do you think were given to you during your training, and how much of that just kind of comes from being there?
It was really on-the-job training, and it was great. After I got out of the military, I became a hospital administrator in a small hospital in Kansas at the university, and did that for 5 years. Went on and got a master's degree and came to Virginia Tech and started at the Squires Student Center. And about a year later, they were going to start the vet school here at Tech. And I had medical administration and had a graduate degree in higher education administration, so I thought that was a pretty good match. So I applied for a job with the new vet school and was fortunate enough to be the first college administrative officer for the new vet school. So I helped get it built and staffed, and it was very rewarding to do that. And that's because I had that medical administrative background from the military, really.
Yeah. How well did your training prepare you for combat?
Well, we weren't in any combat, so we were there to take care of people. So we knew basic first aid, life-saving first aid. We didn't carry weapons because medics aren't supposed to carry weapons, because they know if they shoot the medic, then they've also helped zeroed that person out so he can't help other people. So I think the Army, I think maybe the medics did carry weapons, but we did not have any combat activity for the Air Force people.
Understood. So how long did you stay in Vietnam again, you said?
1 year.
And when did you move on from there?
When my tour was up, I volunteered for another second tour in Southeast Asia, and they sent me to Thailand.
And when was that?
In '69, February of '69.
What was it like in Thailand, and how did that contrast to Vietnam?
It was very nice, like a resort, because the weather was similar in that it's just usually hot and with a rainy season. But they had another beach nearby there, and it was basically an 8 to 5 job. Not quite as exciting or rewarding, so I was not happy in that position either. So I did that year and then got out of the Air Force.
You said earlier that you got a Bronze Star while you were in Taiwan. Do you remember what that was for?
You mean in Vietnam? Oh, I was awarded to me for the service in Vietnam in Thailand.
Understood, sorry. And I said Taiwan, my apologies. So was the day-to-day in Thailand much different?
Yeah, it was, again, a squadron commander position where it's just paperwork, keeping track of all the enlisted people and how their evaluations are doing, what training they need, things like that. It wasn't, compared to Vietnam, it wasn't taxing or rewarding.
At that point, had the fighting in Vietnam died down some when you left, or
not very much? When I looked at the casualty figures on the internet for '68, it got a little less than the first 6 months. The last 6 months was a little less, but it was still pretty active.
Do you remember when you went home?
Not really. That's a good question. I did when I got out of the service. I did. I went home and bought a Volkswagen convertible.
Nice.
And drove it to California to be with a buddy that I was in Texas with. You asked me he got out of the service about the same time, and he was in California. So I drove to California and spent a summer with him in Pasadena, and then came back and then decided I better use my GI Bill, and then went back and got a second bachelor's degree after that. But I don't remember much more than that.
Do you, well, first off, what were you doing in California?
Partying.
Love to hear it.
Having a good time. Didn't work. Had a little money in the bank from saving in the military. Rent was minimal, and we just had a good time.
What was your reception like coming home?
I didn't have a bad reception at all. I know a lot of service people did, but I think being maybe from small town in Kansas, I think they were very supportive of the military general, especially the servicemen.
It's my understanding that it's around that time that the anti-war sentiment was growing. Were you aware of that, and how did that affect you?
No, not really until I got back, and I could see it because I don't think there was any way we were going to win that war. Number one, you didn't know who the enemy was, and it's a little tough to fight when you don't know who the enemy is. We could be walking down the road, and you had no idea because they all look alike, and they're not wearing uniforms, so you don't know. So I think it was it's going to be a hard war to win, and obviously we didn't.
You said you went back to Kansas after California and got your second bachelor's degree. Do you remember what year it was when you finished that?
Let me think about it. 1971, because I only needed a few credits to pick up a second degree.
And from my understanding, 1971 was also the year the prisoners of war were released. Do you remember that? Oh, was that 73? My apologies. Regardless, do you remember that?
I do remember basically that they were released, and McCain and all the rest of them were received back in the United States.
What was that like to hear about?
It was great because those guys went through hell. It's I couldn't imagine doing that.
Did you know anyone who was a prisoner of war?
No, I did not.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
In a similar sense, 2 years later was when Saigon fell. Do you remember where you were for that?
I would have been the hospital administrator in that small hospital I was talking about, and I do remember seeing the government building that we had in Saigon and the helicopter and all the people lined up to get on the helicopters trying to get out. So that's my basic image of that.
Were you always planning on pursuing your further education whenever you got out of the military?
I knew that there was the GI Bill, and there were some time limits on the GI Bill, and after about 5 years, I knew my time limit was running out, but I still had some benefit left there, so I did go back and get a master's using the GI Bill.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear it. It's good to take advantage of all those programs.
Right.
Just to slow down a little bit, I'm curious about how were you feeling that day whenever Saigon fell? Like, you remember where you were, but did you remember having any kind of feelings about the end of the war? And
no, I think it's about time that we got out, and we needed to get everybody out safely that we could.
So to back up just a little bit, you're stationed in Saigon. Most of your service in Vietnam was in 1968, which was the year of the highest casualties.
Right.
Johnson would have withdrew from the presidential race in March, a month after you had been there. I'm curious about, were you paying attention to politics at that time while you were in Vietnam? And if so, were you talking with other service members about it?
I think we would know what was going on in general terms, but I think we were just there to get our year done with and to get out alive. So it's like we didn't talk politics very much.
Fair enough. I mean, that's pretty common. Would you say that you clearly have, like, in hindsight, understanding of the war? You said you don't think it was winnable. When did those realizations come for you in life?
I think when you went out into the sidelines or out into the country, and you saw this beautiful country and all these beautiful people, but that's not who we're fighting. We're fighting people from North Vietnam, but also some people in South Vietnam that were also on their side. So it was like there's no way we're going to win this, and no matter how many U.S. military you put in there, how many bombs you drop, you're not going to be able to stop them. That was their country, and they were fighting for their country.
Was it difficult for you to reconcile your service in Vietnam with that realization?
No, because thank God I was saving people and I wasn't trying to kill people. So that's what made my time there very rewarding.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting to me. JR, so I don't want to take over your whole interview. I'm just, there's a lot that could be covered within that space. So
no, you're good.
You're doing a great job.
Interesting questions as well. I really appreciate that. You mentioned that you just found it incredibly rewarding to be saving people instead of hurting them. Is that when did you decide that that was what you wanted to continue doing with the hospital administration?
I didn't realize that until I needed a job later, and thought, well, I have this experience, and that was rewarding, so let me try that to see if it is as rewarding. Nothing ever matched that year in Vietnam, whether it was in another hospital setting, a student affairs setting, administration setting. There wasn't much that matched that. I did some major projects for the university, and it was nice and very rewarding to get those major projects accomplished, but it wasn't the same as saving lives in Vietnam or helping saving lives in Vietnam.
I think that you're okay to credit yourself with saving some lives, sir. Certainly sounds like you did. What after you were a hospital administrator, what came next for you?
I went back and got a master's degree in higher education administration, so I needed a job, and I wanted to get out of the hospital setting because I always saw were sick people, and sort of a downer. Go to work and there's a bunch of sick people. So I knew someone who worked at the student union at K-State, and that's where people go to have fun. So I thought, well, let me go into that field, which is sort of the opposite. And he knew somebody at Virginia Tech who was looking for somebody to be the assistant director at Squires. And so I got that job and enjoyed it. It was okay for a couple of years, but then it got to be not so enjoyable. So the vet school opportunity came open. And then, so I went back into the medicine, but it wasn't human medicine. And it was higher education administration. So it was educating young people to become veterinarians, which was worthwhile.
Hey, how did you enjoy your education when you went back to get your other degrees?
I was a straight A student. Before that, I was not a straight A student, but I sort of had my feet on the ground, knew what I wanted to do, and it was sort of, let's go, let's get this done and get on with life.
Do you think your time in the military helped prepare you for that?
I think so, yeah. I was a different person after the military.
In what ways?
I just, I had, like I said, my feet on the ground. I think I knew that I needed to get out and get a job that I enjoyed, and I realized that helping people was important to me too, and whether it was educating students or helping people get good medical care.
Yeah. You talked a little bit in the pre-interview about your responsibilities as the administrator for Squires. Can you touch on that some?
Yeah, when I was at Squires in the early 70s, mid-70s, they held rock concerts on campus. And we had the Grateful Dead, which Jason might remember. or heard of, yeah. But the Grateful Dead, Doobie Brothers, George Benson, Steve Martin, when he was first starting out. So we would do those concerts, and I helped with those concerts and manage the activities of Squires that went on in there as far as meetings and things like that. So it was a fun couple of years.
What year was it that you were, or years was it that you were dealing with that?
With that Squires was, let me think, I have to go back. It was 77 to 79. And then I went to the vet school in 79.
What were the most significant differences that you noticed in the student body from your time in college to then?
Well, a lot of deadheads came out for the Grateful. They camped out a week ahead of time at Squires. That's the first time that had ever happened. And obviously that changed how you're going to buy tickets from then on for concerts at Virginia Tech. So that was sort of an interesting experience. The students were, I think, always very good. I think Tech always has a reputation for having good students.
Have you noticed any differences from then and today?
No, I haven't been in contact with many students lately, and so I can't answer that.
Sorry, I interrupted only because you were at Tech in '79, and because Miriam and I we've been brought into another project, and I'm curious, do you remember the first Denim Day?
The first one?
Denim Day? So it was a day in which all of the LGBTQ students.
No.
So that would have been in 1979.
Yeah.
Were there a lot of Deadheads at Virginia Tech in 1979?
A lot of what?
Grateful Dead fans.
Oh yeah. Well, There were fans, but there were fans that weren't from Virginia Tech and came from the outside.
And they came here.
They came here. Yeah,
okay.
they had a great following wherever they go. So probably a majority that camped out here were not students.
Oh, I see. And were you a fan
A fan?
of the Grateful Dead?
No, I was. I had no idea. No, I was not a fan of the Grateful Dead.
What kind of music were you listening to in Vietnam?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't remember. We would have a couple of USO troops come through, but I think it was just the standard rock and roll, whatever was going on. Sort of like Robin Williams and Good Morning Vietnam. Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I keep asking all of these follow-up questions, but you were you were alive during such momentous occasions in American history that I can't help but ask.
Yeah.
So thank you.
It was a pretty eventful period. You're right.
On a similar note, if we can rewind a little bit, being from Kansas, what was it like? And do you remember when Brown versus Board of Education was overruled?
No. That was in, what year was that? 50, huh? That was in 54. Yeah, that was 54. I do know. I obviously know that just from being in higher education administration, that was very important, but I don't remember it happening when I was there.
Do you recall? I mean, I suppose that would have made you about 10 at the time. You would have been school-aged, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember at any point your school ending segregation or integrating with some African-American students?
We had integrated schools, but we had very few black families in small town of El Dorado. There were probably maybe 3 or 4, and had great friends that were black all through high school.
Yeah. Similarly, do you recall JFK's assassination?
Oh, yes. I was in an accounting class in college, and the professor said, life will go on. We'll get over this. And it was a bad situation, but I do exactly remember where I was when it happened.
Yeah. Did you say you were in high school?
No, in college.
In college?
Sorry.
Understood. What was that like for you as someone who was preparing to go into the military?
I really didn't think about any effect that it would have on going into the military. No.
Were there any other large historical occasions that you can think of in your life?
My whole life?
Well, specifically in your younger life.
Oh, younger life, because I could say 9/11, April 16th.
Well, I'd love to hear about where you were for both of those as well.
Okay, let's go back for other events.
So what about the summer of 1968? Dr. King's assassination.
There was that, and Robert Kennedy. Yeah, those were obviously sad events, and you just don't know what's going to happen after that. Something that those two events happen. And things haven't changed too much, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, because of that. If you want to go to 9/11, I know exactly where I was. I was in Burris Hall, working for a vice president, and obviously watched all that happen. And April 16th, the shooting at Virginia Tech, I had just retired and joined the rescue squad, and heard the call go out. I was at home, obviously, as many other rescue squad members came on campus. I was an EMT, but I got also drive an ambulance, so I grabbed one of the last ambulances at the rescue squad. We had to stage for probably an hour or two before we started getting any patients from the shooting. And the patient that ended up in my ambulance was Kevin Stern, whose name has been published in the paper, so I'm not breaking any confidentiality. But he's the one you see in many of the shots where there's a lawman on each of his limbs, 2 on each arm, 1 on each arm, and 1 on each leg, carrying him out. he ended up in my ambulance, took him to the hospital, straight to the OR, and he had a femoral wound, and he survived. He, a few years ago, still worked in Blacksburg. I don't know if he still does or not. So those are memories that I still have.
Yeah, that's incredible. Was what was it like to kind of have another high action and adrenaline filled scenario?
Well, that's a good question. That's the reason I joined the rescue squad after I retired, because I said, if I enjoyed Vietnam, then I enjoyed it. If it was as that rewarding, what could I do after I retire? So I thought, well, let's do patient care like you were doing in Vietnam. So I became an EMT, ambulance driver, and joined the rescue squad. And you do get those adrenaline highs when you have those situations. Now, we don't have that many, thank God, but I do enjoy the rescue squad.
I've spoken with a lot of veterans who, especially in the post 9/11 generation, who talk about coming home from deployments and experiencing hypervigilance, which is one of the characteristics of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm curious, have you ever dealt with trauma in your personal life or mental health that stems from dealing with those high situation, high stakes scenarios in your career, either in Vietnam or even afterwards?
Yeah. No, after April 16th, we had a debriefing, which is to help address things like that. So you get together and you talk about the situation and how you're feeling about it, things like that. So there are mechanisms that at the rescue squad we employed to help people deal with any issues that they may have had from a bad situation like that. But from Vietnam, no.
Did you ever engage in any kind of vet-to-vet programs like the vet center, or even if just casually talking to other Vietnam veterans about your service?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I did touch base with the lady in charge of the veteran service here on campus and offer my assistance, and gave her a couple of ideas, but I haven't worked directly with any vets.
Similarly, was there anyone who you felt comfortable talking about your experiences in Vietnam to who wasn't a veteran?
Who was or wasn't?
Who was not?
Who was not? My wife, of course. But we don't talk about it much because she knows that I think that I was there and that I enjoyed it. I keep using that word enjoy, and I shouldn't. It was rewarding to work there, but I haven't talked to many other people.
Do you have any specific memory, like a favorite one from Vietnam that you found?
Good. Can I look at my cheat sheet, my
Yeah,
list?
absolutely.
Well, I have a note here that I almost drowned in Vietnam. I forgot about that. That was, well, at that beautiful beach that we would go to. I wasn't a good swimmer. Probably couldn't swim at all. But had an air mattress. So I thought, I can do that. I'll get on this air mattress and go out and enjoy the water a little bit. Well, I got it a little bit out too far, jumped off and realized I couldn't touch the bottom. Well, I can't swim, so you better get your butt back to shore somehow. So I did finally paddle my way back to shore. And the next year, then when I went to Thailand, they had a swimming pool at this resort that we went to. So I had taught myself to swim in that swimming pool, so that wouldn't happen again. It was sort of, you don't want to yell out, "Help! Help! I'm drowning! I'm drowning!" When you're really not drowning yet. You're just not touching the bottom of the shore. But anyway, so I did see that when I looked at it. My notes.
Take your time.
We did only have a note here that we worked with all these patients that were severely injured, wounded. We lost one, but it wasn't lost on our unit. When we put him on the airplane, he in flight to Japan, he had through an embolism and did not make it to the destination alive. But that came back to, could we have done anything different? There wasn't anything that we could have done different to prevent that. And on the airplane, they have flight nurses to take care of these people, and I'm sure they did all they could to save that person. But unfortunately, I guess we're lucky that we didn't have anyone that needed any life-saving actions at the Casualty Staging Flight during my year.
So that was the only casualty that you recall?
That's the only the one that we lost that I'm aware of. Uh-huh.
That's incredibly impressive. Yeah. Was that typical for the casualty staging flights?
Yeah, I don't know about the others. It's interesting that there were only 2 other ones, but we really didn't visit them, talk to them at all. So it was like we weren't sure what was going on at the other casualty staging flights.
I know we touched briefly earlier about your understanding of the politics of the war. Has your time in Vietnam changed your perception of war in general or any war sense?
Well, wars happen for a lot of reasons, and unfortunately, a lot of people die, and it's crazy that you have to have wars for no reason at all. Like, just takes human lives, and it's hard. Ukraine, I pray for the Ukrainian people, but it's going to be hard to do anything with that. A lot more lives being lost. There's so many. There's more conflicts going on in the world that we probably don't even know about in Africa, all over the world, and it's crazy.
Yeah. What would you say to any current military or former military personnel about conflict and about war?
Well, usually they're not going to be in combat, the ones that I would talk to. But the people in combat do need support, whether it's administrative support, medical support, whatever it is. There are jobs to do, but it's tough because you have to have a strong military in today's world to probably stop some people from creating conflicts nearby. So, and then the U.S. is sort of the peacekeeper of the world, fortunately or unfortunately sometimes. So I know.
Is there any message or warning you would give to someone who's in the Corps of Cadets or who's going to be deployed here soon?
No, I think the military will train them well and just listen to what they're being taught, and hopefully have a good life, good career.
Yeah. All right. Mr. Johnson, are there any more experiences or memories that you wish to share?
I wish I could remember a lot more details than I do. We had, as I said before, a great group of people that lived in the Hooch with us. We built that patio, had a great time doing that. At Christmas time, the base decided they were going to have a contest to see which unit could decorate their unit for Christmas. And I thought, we're in a war zone. We're fighting a war. And you want us to do decorating? I said, okay, if you're going to do that, we're going to win this thing. So, okay, guys, what do you want to do? So we took, and Cameron Bay is basically all sand, but there were a few palm trees planted around the base. So I said, all right, we're going to go out on a midnight salvage. We're going to dig up palm trees at the officers club, and we're going to bring them back to our unit and plant them. Everybody want to do that? And I said, oh, yeah, let's do that. So we did that one night, and of course we won an award for the thing. I said, if they're going to have a contest, we're going to win it. I think it's dumb to have it, but let's just take one night out and everybody go do it. And then we did that, and that was sort of fun. It's morale boosting for the guys too.
Yeah.
But the nurses were great there. The patients were always understanding and thankful. And we did have some psych patients that we transported out because of psychological reasons, but most of them were either walking wounded or not walking wounded that we took care of. And morale was good. It was had good people to work with. Everybody had the right frame of mind while they were there.
Were there any other activities that you remember that were kind of for the same morale boosting purposes?
The USO tours that came through were good. Those were usually.
I'm sorry, what were the USO?
I'm sorry.
What was the USO?
What does that stand for? United Service Organization. It's usually famous bands or singers. They're comedians that would come around to the bases and perform to entertain the troops. I know they did it in World War II, and they continued during the Korea War and the Vietnam War, and that's the way we would sort of keep morale up on bases for all the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, whoever it was. Then we did get to take what's called R&R. I don't know if anyone has mentioned R&R. It's rest and relaxation, which means you get to leave Vietnam for a week. And so I went to Japan once. Since I was in Southeast Asia for 2 years, I got to go on a couple of R&Rs. I went to Hong Kong once. On business, I went to, for the Air Force, I went to Okinawa in the Philippines. So we did get off base a couple of times a year to recuperate, rest, relax, have a good time. So that was, everyone looked forward to that time.
Outside of the military, did you do a lot of traveling?
I did some, yes. I went to Europe a couple of times. The United States, I think I've gone to 48 of the 50 states. So I do enjoy traveling very much.
Do you know which two you haven't gone to yet?
I think it's North Dakota and maybe Wisconsin. I'm not sure.
That's really neat.
But I have the hard ones. I have Hawaii and Alaska. The others are automobile. Can do that. And I enjoy national parks. Been to a lot, but I don't know how many.
Do you have a favorite state to visit or a national park to visit?
National park, I would probably say Grand Canyon. It was very nice, gorgeous. But I did enjoy that. We did enjoy that. New Mexico, I like New Mexico a lot.
Have you ever considered moving out of Blacksburg or?
No. When I retired, Blacksburg was on a lot of national lists for the best place to retire in the country, small town. And, my wife and I discussed it, and I said, where else do you want to live that's going to be any better than Blacksburg? And so we decided to stay here and do enjoy it. It's growing, it's still growing, getting bigger, but it is a nice place to live, especially in the summers.
Do you ever manage to get to any of the Virginia Tech football games or?
No,
like that?
I grew up in Kansas with the, I think then it was the Big Eight, but it's Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, and we had great Colorado and Missouri. We had great football teams that were always nationally ranked. And when I came to Tech, they were at the bottom. They were not nationally ranked in football or even near the top 25. So I never got interested in Virginia Tech football. And then Michael Vick came along, and they did get nationally ranked, played for the championship, but I just never got interested enough to attend football games.
Well, unfortunately, we're back down to being at the bottom of the barrel now.
But things may turn around.
Fingers crossed for this season,
Yeah.
certainly. How do you feel your time in the military, or if it did, impact your relationship with your wife?
With my wife?
Yes, sir.
We've been together now 25, going over more than 25 years. And I'm not sure that being in the military has impacted our relationship at all. You can ask her. I'll ask her when I get home.
Did you ever have any children?
No children.
Do you similarly, you don't have children of your own, but would you caution or something like that to someone you knew who was considering going into the military?
I guess just, be sure you know what you're doing and what life changes may come about because of that, because the military is noted for moving people around every year or two. So if you don't like moving around, you probably don't want to be in the military. Some people enjoy that because they get to see different countries, different states. But but I think most people that are going to make a career in the military realize that. But they should, if they don't, that it's not going to be in one place for 10 or 15, 20 years.
Before I start kind of wrapping up, is there any last thoughts, memories, anything at all that you'd like to talk about?
No, I looked at the list. I can't believe I think I did touch on most of them. No, I can't think of anything.
Okay.
I did learn how to drive a bus when I was in the military because that's how we transported these patients to the runway. So I did learn how to drive a 44-passenger bus that we take all the seats out to put the litters in. We stack them 3 high, the litters. So I did get to drive an ambulance. So I got some touch of what it might be like to become an EMT in the military, which is probably why I did decide to go ahead and become a EMT ambulance driver.
Yeah, very much appreciate.
Other things, people are human, no matter where they are. A lot of people enjoyed Vietnam. A lot of people were miserable because they had a family back home that they couldn't see or be with, and I can sure appreciate that. So thankfully, I guess that I was single at that time and didn't have a family to worry about me, except for my parents.
Yeah. Were you ever concerned about your brother during his service on the other end of that?
No, he was in the Army in the missile field, and he was in Germany with missiles, I guess, that were going to be sent to Russia or whoever our enemy was going to be at the time. But I didn't worry too much about him, his safety, because I know he wasn't a ground combat Army person.
What was your relationship with him like growing up?
He was much older and 12 years older, and he was sort of my idol. He was a track star, went to college, but we weren't close because of the age difference, really.
Did that change at all growing up?
Yeah, I think we probably became closer later in life.
So what does patriotism mean to you?
Good question. I guess believing in what your country believes for or stands for, and if you do that, I think you're a patriot. But you obviously have to believe what your country stands for.
What would you say to people who, love their country but might disagree with their actions?
I think disagreement is fine as long as it's peaceful.
Yeah.
It is using arms or violence in a disagreement is not the way to disagree.
Yeah. Certainly very relevant just this month. How do you memorialize your time in Vietnam and look back?
Well, I wish I'd have kept track of people more that I worked with in Vietnam, I think. And my wife found this website that's for Vietnam veterans. And so you can put in what years you were there and sort of zone in on those veterans. And so I might try to find someone that I was with in Vietnam, but I'm 80 years old now, so a lot of them may not still be around. And I don't remember all of their names, and that's unfortunate that I don't remember more of their names to look up.
Yeah, I understand that there's a number of Facebook groups as well to help.
Yeah, that I
connect
think it
those
is a Facebook group
Yeah,
that she found. Right.
that's really neat. Would you be interested in, and what would you say to anyone who you managed to reconnect with now?
I'd always would like to know what they're doing, how they got along in life so far, and probably most of them are retired. So just see how they're doing.
Yeah, hopefully they're retired.
Yeah.
What outside of, or I'm sorry, not outside of, but you mentioned that your year in Vietnam was one of the highlights of your life, and that you still look back fondly on that because of how rewarding it was. Was there anything else, either specifically in that time or outside of that time, that you found to kind of match that feeling?
Oh, outside of that, I guess the being on the rescue squad, the times that you help save lives. I know my wife and I, she's also an EMT. We were on an ambulance and had a patient who wasn't doing well at all, and so we stopped the ambulance, and fortunately we had our medical director behind us, and he got on the ambulance with us. We went to the hospital, and they had to intubate that patient, and when he came out, I am going to get emotional. He said, "Okay, guys, we saved a life. Congratulations." So that was very nice.
Yeah. Did I hear you correctly that your wife was with you then?
Mm-hmm.
Did she work on the rescue squad as well?
Yes, she does.
What was it like to work with your wife?
Well, I was on it for 5 years and told her how much I enjoyed it. So she decided to join also. So she joined, and I've been there 16 years, and she's been there like 11. She's 5 years behind me. But we almost always work as a team. We both can drive, so sometimes she'll split up if we need 2 ambulances to go. But a lot of times we'll be on the same ambulance together, but not always. But and we enjoy working together. We know each other and strengths and weaknesses, and can try to almost read each other's mind of what they're going to need on the ambulance. So we enjoy that.
Are there any other times that stand out to you of saving a life or contributing to saving someone's life that you'd like to talk about?
No, we had this medical director in Vietnam, Robert Angel. I always remember his name. He was a heart surgeon that trained in Texas under a famous heart surgeon, DeBakey. And he was so good in giving us any help that we needed, especially during TET and right after TET. He said, "Well, whatever you need, just let us know, and you'll have it. You'll get it." But, we had our vehicles, we had our medics. We didn't need anybody that we had to train because that's just going to take time away from us doing the job. So I appreciated him very much. Almost in all my jobs, I can think of somebody that I really enjoyed working with. At K-State, the hospital director, Bob Sinclair, was just great to work with. Ray Smoot here at Virginia Tech. Dick Talbot, who was dean at the vet school that hired me and unfortunately died in an airplane crash. He was just super to work with. So I just enjoyed working with people, and I had great people to work with. Most of my career and what I did at Virginia Tech, for the last 16 years was special projects. And what I liked about that, it had a beginning and an end. I didn't like jobs that you did every day, the same thing. Special projects, they start, and you have a goal to complete them. And when they're done, and you go on to another project. And so I sort of enjoy doing that type of things in my life.
Certainly, you're working towards something when you're in Vietnam and working through that casualty staging flights. But you mentioned you disliked the monotony of something happening every day. Certainly, there are different experiences. But what was that like for you in Vietnam? Then,
Yeah,
where you were kind of
it's different because it was every day the same thing, but it was always different people, different patients the same day who had something different wrong with them. So you may have had to do something different to get them on the litter, or they present challenges that you don't have every day. So even though they were always patients, they always were human beings and had different things wrong with them that you had to deal with and take care of, getting them on the airplane so they could go get further care, medical care someplace else.
Does any patient stick out in your mind?
Oh, guys, the burn patients that I spoke about with the napalm, the patient with the baby tiger, we had so many that none of them stick out, really. We had one patient that I remember walked around with his IV pole, and to go to the bathroom, he just pulled, drug it along with him and took it into the bathroom with him. But you didn't get attached to those patients because you only had them for less than 24 hours, and so you really had so many.
I understand it, a constant refresh, but what were your interactions like with those patients? And were there any meaningful conversations, whether you remember them or not? Just was that something that happened?
Yeah, no, we didn't. Our crew didn't, because we really were the transport, bringing them off the plane back to the plane. So we weren't taking care of my medics were not taking care of them on an hour-to-hour basis. That was left to the nurses and other medics. So we didn't get involved in their actual hour-to-hour patient care. As more transport is what we did.
Understood. Have you been to the wall for the Vietnam veterans?
Yes, I have.
What was that like?
It's very moving, nice. It's I think a good tribute to the Vietnam veterans.
Yeah. What was it like to see it for the first time?
Well, it's sort of overwhelming to see all those names there, and obviously the ultimate sacrifice that they gave.
Certainly, it's harrowing. Is there anything, just last time to ask you, if there's anything you...
No, I'll probably go home and say, oh gosh, I wish I remembered that to say that. But I looked at my notes and I don't see anything that I really missed.
All right. Well, in that case, my last question for you is just, how would you like to be remembered?
Overall, as a person who cares for people, who served people, whether it was in Vietnam or at Virginia Tech, and respect their values and treat people like you want to be treated.
That's touching. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Mr. Johnson. That's all I've got for you, though.
Thank you. Good.